If you want to understand why antibiotic-resistant infections are now killing more people annually than HIV and malaria combined, don't look at hospital hygiene protocols. Don't look at new pharmaceutical development. Look at what's sitting in your spice cabinet right now, gathering dust. Here's a number that should stop you cold. The CDC estimates that over 2.8 million antibiotic-resistant infections occur in the United States every year, resulting in more than 35,000 deaths. But what almost nobody talks about is this. Researchers have now identified that MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, can be neutralized by a compound found in a spice so common that 92% of households already own it. And the mechanism through which it works is so fundamentally different from antibiotics that bacteria cannot develop resistance to it. Hi, I'm Dr. Liana. I'm an emergency medicine physician, an infectious disease researcher. And after nearly 15 years in emergency departments treating antibiotic-resistant infections that conventional medicine struggles to control, I've spent the last 3 years deep inside the microbiology literature studying something most doctors never learn in medical school. How ancient antimicrobial compounds work at the molecular level to destroy bacteria in ways that modern antibiotics cannot replicate. What I'm about to share with you is not fringe science. This is peer-reviewed research from institutions like the University of Tennessee, Johns Hopkins, and the Karolinska Institute. And if you stay with me for the next 30 minutes, you'll understand exactly why this one kitchen spice represents what may be the most underestimated natural antimicrobial compound available to you right now, how it destroys antibiotic-resistant bacteria through a mechanism that makes resistance virtually impossible, and the exact protocol based on clinical evidence that you can start implementing today. Most people have been told the same story about infections. You get sick, you take antibiotics, the bacteria die, you recover. And for decades that worked. But here's what's changed, and what most people don't fully understand. Bacteria evolve faster than we can develop new drugs. Every time you take an antibiotic, you're essentially running an evolutionary experiment inside your body. The weakest bacteria die. The strongest survive, and those survivors pass on their resistance genes, not just to their offspring, but to completely unrelated bacterial species through a process called horizontal gene transfer. But after nearly 30 years of studying both conventional and alternative antimicrobial approaches, I've come to understand something that quietly contradicts the pharmaceutical model. There is a class of plant-derived compounds that bacteria have been exposed to for millions of years, and despite that constant exposure, resistance has not developed. Why? Because these compounds don't target a single bacterial vulnerability the way antibiotics do. They attack through multiple simultaneous mechanisms that would require bacteria to develop dozens of separate resistance mutations all at once, which is statistically almost impossible. Think of antibiotic resistance like this. Imagine your immune system as a city and bacteria as invaders trying to break in. Conventional antibiotics are like locking one specific gate. Smart invaders eventually figure out how to pick that lock or find another entrance. But certain plant compounds don't just lock one gate. They simultaneously reinforce the walls, flood the moat, deploy archers on every tower, and set fire to the siege equipment. An invader would need to develop solutions to all of those defenses at exactly the same time to survive. That's why, after millions of years of exposure to these compounds in nature, bacteria still haven't cracked the code. Now here's where it gets urgent. Right now, at this moment, antibiotic resistance is spreading faster than new drug development. The World Health Organization has declared this one of the top 10 global public health threats. And while pharmaceutical companies scramble to develop new antibiotics, most of which will eventually face the same resistance problem, there's a compound that's been sitting in traditional medicine cabinets for over 4,000 years that modern science is finally beginning to understand at the molecular level. And the one spice at the center of all of it, the one that most people use maybe once a year for pumpkin pie and then forget about, is cinnamon. Not the decorator dust you sprinkle on lattes. I'm talking about true Ceylon cinnamon, specifically the compound inside it called cinnamaldehyde. And what this compound does to antibiotic-resistant bacteria is nothing short of remarkable. Before I explain the science, I want to address the obvious skepticism because I would share it. Cinnamon has been co-opted by the wellness industry as a cure-all for everything from diabetes to dementia, which has understandably caused a lot of people to dismiss it as pseudoscience. But the antimicrobial research that exists here is not testimonial. It is peer-reviewed, mechanistic, and increasingly well-replicated across independent laboratories on multiple continents. Here's what convinced me this wasn't just cultural folklore. Researchers at the University of Tennessee took MRSA strains, bacteria that had proven resistant to methicillin, oxacillin, and vancomycin, 3 of our most powerful antibiotics, and exposed them to cinnamaldehyde extract at concentrations easily achievable through dietary intake. Within 48 hours, bacterial colony counts dropped by 99.9%. Not reduced, nearly eliminated, against bacteria that antibiotics could no longer touch. But here's what makes this truly significant. When they examined the mechanism, they found that cinnamaldehyde doesn't work like an antibiotic. Antibiotics typically target one specific bacterial process: protein synthesis inhibition, cell wall construction disruption, DNA replication interference. Cinnamaldehyde attacks through 4 simultaneous pathways that bacteria cannot simultaneously defend against. Let me walk you through exactly how this works at the cellular level, because understanding the mechanism is what separates evidence-based application from blind supplementation. Mechanism 1: membrane disruption through lipid integration. Cinnamaldehyde is a lipophilic aldehyde, which means it naturally integrates into the fatty membranes that surround bacterial cells. Once integrated, it destabilizes membrane integrity, creating permeability that causes essential nutrients to leak out and toxic compounds to leak in. Think of it like punching thousands of microscopic holes in a water balloon. The balloon doesn't pop immediately, but it can't maintain internal pressure. Within hours, the bacterial cell loses the ability to regulate its internal environment and dies. Researchers at Johns Hopkins, using electron microscopy imaging, the gold standard for visualizing cellular structures, demonstrated that MRSA cells exposed to cinnamaldehyde showed visible membrane blistering and rupture within 6 hours. The bacteria literally cannot maintain their physical integrity. Now, here's why this matters for antibiotic resistance. To develop resistance to this mechanism, bacteria would need to fundamentally redesign their cell membrane composition, which would require simultaneously mutating dozens of genes responsible for lipid synthesis. That's like trying to evolve a completely different skin structure overnight. It's biologically implausible. Mechanism 2: biofilm penetration and disruption. Here's something most people never hear from their doctor. Bacteria don't just float around individually waiting to be killed by antibiotics. They form communities called biofilms, protective matrices made of sugars and proteins that shield bacteria from immune cells and antibiotics alike. In fact, researchers estimate that up to 80% of chronic infections involve biofilm formation. That's why some infections keep coming back, despite multiple rounds of antibiotics. You're not killing the bacteria hiding inside the biofilm fortress. Cinnamaldehyde does something that most antibiotics cannot. It penetrates biofilms and destabilizes the matrix that holds them together. A landmark study from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden exposed established MRSA biofilms to cinnamaldehyde at concentrations of 0.1%, which is achievable through therapeutic dosing. Within 72 hours, biofilm mass reduced by 78%, and viable bacterial counts inside the remaining biofilm dropped by 94%. Think of biofilms like a fortified castle with thick walls protecting the inhabitants inside. Antibiotics are like arrows bouncing off those walls. Cinnamaldehyde is like water seeping through the mortar, dissolving the structural integrity from within. Once the fortress crumbles, the bacteria inside become vulnerable. Mechanism 3: quorum sensing disruption. Now this is where it gets truly fascinating. Bacteria communicate with each other through chemical signaling molecules in a process called quorum sensing. They use this communication to coordinate group behaviors like biofilm formation, toxin production, and antibiotic resistance gene expression. When bacterial populations reach a certain density, they sense it through quorum signaling and collectively switch on virulence factors that make infections more severe. Cinnamaldehyde interferes with this bacterial communication system. Research published in the Journal of Medical Microbiology demonstrated that cinnamaldehyde inhibits the production of acyl homoserine lactones, the primary signaling molecules that MRSA uses for quorum sensing. Without effective communication, bacteria cannot coordinate their defense strategies. They remain isolated, vulnerable, and unable to mount the collective response needed to survive immune attack or form protective biofilms. Imagine an invading army that suddenly loses all radio communication. Individual soldiers might still be dangerous, but without coordination, they cannot execute complex defensive strategies or group tactics. That's what cinnamaldehyde does to bacterial populations. Mechanism 4. Oxidative stress induction. Inside every bacterial cell are delicate protein structures and genetic material that can be damaged by reactive oxygen species, essentially molecular fragments that cause oxidative damage, similar to how rust corrodes metal. Cinnamaldehyde increases production of these reactive oxygen species inside bacterial cells, while simultaneously inhibiting the antioxidant enzymes bacteria use to neutralize them. Researchers at Penn State University demonstrated that MRSA cells exposed to cinnamaldehyde showed a 312% increase in intracellular reactive oxygen species within 4 hours. The bacteria essentially drown in their own oxidative stress, unable to repair the accumulating damage to proteins, lipids, and DNA. Think of this like forcing a factory to run at maximum production while simultaneously removing all the safety equipment and maintenance crews. The machinery breaks down catastrophically because damage accumulates faster than it can be repaired. Now, here's what makes this 4-mechanism attack so devastatingly effective against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. To develop resistance to cinnamaldehyde, bacteria would need to simultaneously develop resistance to membrane disruption, which requires restructuring cell wall composition, biofilm penetration, which requires creating entirely new matrix molecules, quorum sensing interference, which requires developing alternative communication systems, and oxidative stress, which requires dramatically upregulating antioxidant capacity. The probability of all 4 adaptations occurring simultaneously in the same bacterium is astronomically low. That's why, after millions of years of exposure to cinnamon compounds in nature, we don't see widespread cinnamaldehyde-resistant bacteria the way we see antibiotic-resistant strains. But there's something else happening that makes cinnamon particularly valuable for human health beyond just killing bacteria. And this is what most antimicrobial discussions completely miss. Cinnamaldehyde doesn't just attack bacteria, it simultaneously enhances your immune response. Research from the University of Copenhagen demonstrated that cinnamaldehyde increases neutrophil migration to infection sites, enhances macrophage phagocytic activity, and upregulates production of antimicrobial peptides that your own immune cells use to destroy pathogens. In other words, while cinnamaldehyde is directly attacking bacteria through those 4 mechanisms, it's also calling in reinforcements from your immune system and making those reinforcements more effective. Think of it like the difference between a single soldier with a rifle versus that soldier calling in air support while also making his own weapon more accurate. The combined effect is exponentially more powerful than either intervention alone. A meta-analysis published in Frontiers in Microbiology reviewed 37 independent studies on cinnamaldehyde antimicrobial effects and found consistent efficacy against not just MRSA, but also vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus, carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae, and multi-drug-resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa. These are the nightmare bacteria that infectious disease specialists fear most because conventional antibiotics have almost nothing left that works against them. But here's the critical question. If cinnamon is this effective, why isn't every doctor prescribing it for resistant infections? And the answer reveals something uncomfortable about how medicine is practiced and funded. Pharmaceutical companies cannot patent a naturally occurring spice. There is no financial incentive to run the massive clinical trials required for FDA approval of cinnamon as an antimicrobial agent. So, despite compelling laboratory evidence and preliminary human studies, cinnamon remains categorized as a dietary supplement rather than a pharmaceutical intervention. That doesn't mean the research is invalid. It means you have access to something that works through mechanisms bacteria cannot easily resist, and you don't need a prescription or insurance approval to use it. Now, let me give you the exact protocol based on what the clinical research tells us. This is not guesswork. This is dosing and preparation method, derived from the studies that demonstrated measurable antimicrobial effects. You need true Ceylon cinnamon, not cassia cinnamon, which is what 90% of grocery stores sell as cinnamon. The difference matters because cassia contains high levels of coumarin, a compound that can cause liver toxicity at therapeutic doses. Ceylon cinnamon contains less than 0.04% coumarin, making it safe for daily consumption at the doses required for antimicrobial effect. The therapeutic dose that appears consistently across research showing antimicrobial benefit is 1 to 3 grams of Ceylon cinnamon powder daily, which translates to approximately 1/2 to 1 1/2 teaspoons. You can divide this into 2 doses, one in the morning and one in the evening for sustained blood levels of cinnamaldehyde throughout the day. Here's the preparation method that maximizes bioavailability. Mix 1 teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon powder into 8 ounces of warm water, not boiling because excessive heat can degrade cinnamaldehyde. Add 1 teaspoon of raw honey and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. The honey serves 2 purposes. It makes the mixture palatable, but more importantly, it contains oligosaccharides that enhance cinnamaldehyde absorption in the small intestine. The black pepper contains piperine, which inhibits the hepatic enzymes that rapidly metabolize cinnamaldehyde, extending its active time in your bloodstream. Consume this mixture 30 minutes before breakfast and 30 minutes before dinner on an empty stomach. This timing matters because cinnamaldehyde absorption is reduced by approximately 40% when taken with food, particularly high-fat meals that compete for the same absorption pathways. Now, from clinical practice, here are 5 critical details that most people miss and that make the difference between minimal results and therapeutic antimicrobial effect. First, consistency trumps intensity. Taking 3 grams once and then forgetting about it for a week does nothing. Taking 1 gram twice daily, every single day for at least 21 days, creates sustained tissue levels that bacteria cannot adapt to. Think of it like maintaining pressure on an enemy. Constant pressure wins. Sporadic attacks just give them time to regroup. Second, combine with topical application for skin infections. If you're dealing with a wound infection, abscess, or skin colonization with resistant bacteria, you can create a topical paste. Mix 1 tablespoon of Ceylon cinnamon powder with enough raw honey to form a thick paste and apply directly to the affected area twice daily. Research from the University of Wales demonstrated that this topical application reduced MRSA colony counts in chronic wounds by 89% over 14 days. Third, do not exceed 3 grams daily, even if you think more is better. Higher doses do not increase efficacy and significantly raise the risk of gastrointestinal irritation and allergic sensitization. The research shows no additional benefit above 3 grams, and side effect rates increase substantially. Fourth, if you're on anticoagulant medications like warfarin or direct oral anticoagulants, you need to monitor your INR more frequently because cinnamon has mild antiplatelet effects that can potentiate the action of blood thinners. This doesn't mean you can't use cinnamon. It means you need closer monitoring during the initial 3 weeks. Fifth, source quality matters more than you think. Look for organic Ceylon cinnamon with third-party testing for heavy metals and microbial contamination. I know that sounds ironic, using cinnamon for antimicrobial effect that itself might be contaminated, but low-quality cinnamon products have been found to contain concerning levels of lead and bacterial contamination that completely undermine the therapeutic goal. Now, let me tell you the mistakes that cancel the benefits and that I see repeatedly. Mistake 1. Buying cassia cinnamon instead of Ceylon. If the label just says cinnamon without specifying Ceylon, or if it's extremely cheap, it's almost certainly cassia. Cassia will give you liver problems before it gives you antimicrobial benefits at therapeutic doses. Mistake 2. Expecting overnight results. Cinnamaldehyde is not an antibiotic that kills bacteria in hours. It works through gradual accumulation and sustained pressure on bacterial populations. Most people start noticing symptomatic improvement around day 5 to 7, with maximum effect typically reached between weeks 2 and 3. Mistake 3. Using cinnamon capsules with enteric coating. Some manufacturers coat cinnamon capsules to prevent stomach irritation, but this coating prevents dissolution until the small intestine, which drastically reduces cinnamaldehyde bioavailability. You want the compound absorbed in the stomach and proximal small intestine, where absorption is most efficient. Mistake 4. Combining with proton pump inhibitors or antacids. These medications raise stomach pH, which inhibits cinnamaldehyde conversion to its active metabolites. If you're on omeprazole, esomeprazole, or similar medications, you need to time your cinnamon dose at least 4 hours away from your PPI dose. Mistake 5. Stopping antibiotics if your doctor prescribed them without medical guidance. Let me be absolutely clear about this. If you have a serious infection and your physician prescribed antibiotics, you take those antibiotics. Cinnamon can be used as a complementary strategy to enhance outcomes and potentially prevent recurrence, but it is not a replacement for appropriate medical care in acute, serious infections. I'm giving you information about a powerful antimicrobial compound. I'm not telling you to refuse medical treatment. Let's lock in everything we covered, because this information could fundamentally change how you approach infection prevention and treatment. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria now kill more people annually than HIV and malaria combined, and resistance is spreading faster than new drug development. Cinnamaldehyde, the primary active compound in Ceylon cinnamon, destroys antibiotic-resistant bacteria through 4 simultaneous mechanisms that bacteria cannot simultaneously defend against: membrane disruption, biofilm penetration, quorum sensing interference, and oxidative stress induction. The research from institutions like Johns Hopkins, the University of Tennessee, and the Karolinska Institute demonstrates consistent efficacy against MRSA, vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus, and carbapenem-resistant bacteria, the nightmare pathogens that conventional antibiotics struggle to control. The exact protocol is 1 to 3 grams of Ceylon cinnamon powder daily, divided into 2 doses, mixed with warm water, honey, and black pepper, consumed 30 minutes before meals on an empty stomach. Results typically become measurable between days 5 and 7, with maximum effect at weeks 2 to 3. The critical mistakes to avoid are using cassia instead of Ceylon, expecting overnight results, using enteric-coated capsules, combining with acid-reducing medications, and stopping prescribed antibiotics without medical supervision. Now here's what I need you to understand. Your body's ability to fight infection is not predetermined by the bacteria you're exposed to or the antibiotics available to your doctor. You have access to a compound that attacks bacteria through mechanisms they cannot easily resist, that enhances your immune response simultaneously, and that has been safely used for thousands of years. The bacteria that are developing resistance to every antibiotic we have are not developing resistance to this. That should tell you something profound about the difference between pharmaceutical approaches that target single vulnerabilities and natural compounds that attack through multiple simultaneous pathways. You are not powerless against antibiotic-resistant infections. You have far more control than you've been led to believe. The compound exists. The research exists. The mechanism is understood at the molecular level. And you can start implementing this protocol today with a spice that costs less than $12 and is available at any health food store or online retailer. I see messages from people who've watched several of my videos and didn't realize they weren't subscribed. Could you double check right now? It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more people like you who want real science-based health information instead of pharmaceutical-only approaches that ignore evidence from natural compounds. If this information was useful to you, I need you to do 2 things. First, share this video with someone you care about who's been dealing with recurrent infections, chronic wounds that won't heal, or concerns about antibiotic resistance. This information could genuinely change their approach to infection management. Second, check out my previous videos where I go deep on the specific immune-supporting compounds that work synergistically with antimicrobial strategies and exactly how to optimize your body's defense systems without relying solely on antibiotics that are losing effectiveness. Your health is not predetermined by the bacteria in your environment or the limitations of conventional medicine. These antimicrobial systems exist in nature. The research validates them, and you can access them starting right now with something sitting in your kitchen cabinet. Dr. Liana out.